Olá, começa agora o Meio Tempo, programa da Escola de Comunicação, Mídia e Informação da Fundação Getúlio Vargas. O Tribunal Superior Eleitoral adverte: candidato nas eleições municipais de 2024 que usar inteligência artificial para produzir ou disseminar fake news pode ter o registro cassado. A nossa conversa hoje vai de Alexandre de Moraes a Sam Altman, passando por Donald Trump. Aumenta o som, começou nosso programa. Eu recebo hoje a gerente de projetos do Democracy Reporting International, Heather Thompson, e o sociólogo diretor da Escola de Comunicação, Mídia e Informação, ECMI, Marco Aurélio Rudiger. Bem-vindos, é um prazer ter os dois aqui. Excepcionalmente, agora eu vou mudar para o inglês, já que a Heather é de Los Angeles, mora em Berlim. So, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you both. And we're going to begin as usual with an ice-breaking moment, hora do nosso momento quebra-gelo. A question for you both. Donald Trump or Joe Biden, who is going to be the next U.S. president?
Would you like to start?
So, what you're the American.
I know.
So.
I can
We need to realize that's the idea, you know?
Yeah.
I have no idea actually, but I expect that Joe Biden can be president again for the next mandate, and hopefully this works. But I understand also that will be a huge amount of discussion on identities and a lot of fake news, and overall geopolitical situation in the world will make a huge impact in the process, and in the end we're going to see very strong amount of use of artificial intelligence during the elections that will probably distort the debates much more than we ever seen until now. So I think it's a very tough answer, but I hope that Joe Biden wins in the end, but I'm not American, so.
But you're giving a spoiler. We're going to talk about all of this.
Yeah.
Heather, what do you think? Re-election or Donald Trump again?
Yes, well, I would say, obviously, I very much hope that Joe Biden will win. And I am an optimist in this matter. I think that he will win. I think Donald Trump is currently doing us a bit of a favor, because the more he speaks about his goals or his next agenda as president, the more scary it is for so many of us, and it is really a rallying point on the left to get them up and vote. I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of fear, especially now that we're a year out from the election, and recent polling by the New York Times and by Siena College has shown that Biden is behind in the polls, and this has created sort of a shock wave of fear throughout the political elite in the states. But I think two things. One, it's important not to panic, because it creates this atmosphere that his election is inevitable and that there's nothing that we can do about it. And the second thing is that we're still a year out. I'm much more concerned, as you say, about the months preceding the vote directly, when I'm sure we will see a lot of manipulation and increased use of AI, and that these votes, and we have from the first election of Donald Trump, really the news that hit just before with Hillary's emails in particular became one of the biggest swingers, and we saw that more people just chose to stay home rather than choose to vote for Hillary or for Trump either. So for me, that's the concern, is we need to find a way to mobilize people to get up and vote and say that they don't agree with this, and the majority of Americans don't agree with the direction that Trump has chosen. But I'm worried that people will feel a lack of motivation, a lack of control. And I think fear-mongering or creating more fear around what Trump can do is going to help keep people home. We need to be more optimistic, more action-oriented, and say that we refute this.
The reason I'm asking this question is because 2024 is going to be a very important year election-wise. More than half of the population of the planet is going to vote for something, like in the US, for president, for mayors here in Brazil. for representatives, whatever. And 2023, according to Sam Altman, was the year when the average tech person started to take artificial intelligence seriously. We have ChatGPT, we had the use of artificial intelligence in Argentina already, for instance. Can it be a dangerous coincidence, Marco?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of interesting coincidence right now. We have a situation where democracy have been attacked for more than a decade through the web, through the digital sphere, in the digital sphere, and we had a huge impact in democracies, and we know that fake news is not something really new anymore, but the way it is produced, the sophistication of the process, it increases a lot since then. And when we get the problems that we just saw, Sam Altman and the creation of the ChatGPTs and artificial intelligence have been using to not only change some facts and some of parts of the discourse, but even creating people that doesn't exist in the end. So this changes a lot. And if you get this in one hand, in the other hand, we have the overall geopolitical tensions that we have right now in the world. I would say Israel has been attacked. You have the problems in Ukraine as well, a war going on there. And now we have Maduro in Venezuela claiming about parts of territory of the other country.
And there will be elections in Taiwan.
There will be elections in Taiwan, yes, that's
yeah.
right. And we just sent someone from our school, a professor, to be there in a debate that the NDI is held in there. So if you get everything together, we have a lot of stress on democracy, a lot of stress. And this geopolitical situation is it's one of the arms that some more, I would say, authoritarian regimes and leaders are trying to stretch their power in terms of, I would say, bend some institutions in democracy in a certain sense. On the other hand, we have this tension and continuous attack on democracy and institutions all over the democratic world, part coming from the extreme right, part coming from other countries. So I'm really worried about democracy in this particular time that we are living right now. The problem is that we don't have answers. We don't have regulation. It's not quite clear how we can maintain, which is extremely important, freedom of speech and association and so forth, but also regulate the hate speech in the web. So it's a very, very complicated, it's a totally new world. And I would say it's the beginning of a new world. So our institutions has to make a kind of a walk through a path from the last century to this century, which is totally different in terms of the arrangement that we have to create in terms of normative procedures, law, and the use of the web, which is changing everything. So right now, democracy has to reinvent itself, which is completely difficult for us.
Yeah, we see the rise of populists. We've been seeing that in the past, decade, I'd say. Illiberal democracies. We do have that in Europe, and now we have an outsider, Javier Milei in Argentina, and a new tool, like I was saying, artificial intelligence. And I mean, there's this discussion about regulation. European Union is preparing this Artificial Intelligence Act. We're waiting to see what's going to come along. I mean, the U.S. is already worried about it. And But basically, Heather, the same question I asked Marco, how do you see this combination? I mean, the world, the way we have it right now, with this new powerful tool.
Yeah, I do think it's a dangerous coincidence or putting together circumstances. I mean, as Marco said, we've seen a lot of democratic backsliding, and I think we have good reason to be concerned about that in the U.S. As well. And then we have this rise of the tools, which are not terribly new, but they are new in the public consciousness. And the reality now is that using AI makes it more feasible, easier to make disinformation. And there used to be a trade-off between making a lot of disinformation and making high-quality disinformation. And that trade-off really does not exist anymore. And we have so many options. And I think it's important that we delineate the different types of ways that AI can be used to sow disinformation, because we have synthetic videos, we have synthetic images, we have deepfakes, which are technically partially synthetic, and we've already seen them being used for political purposes. I would say not entirely successfully, but we also have synthetic audio now, which is increasingly, very convincing. And then, of course, there's the text. So it's really about levels of danger that each of these pose. At DRI, we're particularly concerned these days with the power of audio, synthetic AI, for swaying people. I mean, there is sort of the low-grade use of it, which is using it to scam your grandmother by calling her on the phone. But also, there have been cases of people using synthetic audio to defraud companies of, I think, millions of dollars. And they ultimately couldn't verify the audio because they couldn't find the source later. And there are ways to detect it, but if the source goes away, then it just sows a lot of distrust, a lot of confusion. And for me, I would say that's the biggest issue with AI in this moment, is that we still know on the internet that most of disinformation is still using old techniques, and the key part of disinformation is really the emotion, the story you tell with it, and those are still things that we have to put in ourselves as humans. But even though there have been very few uses, relatively, of deepfakes, for instance, what they're doing is sowing an atmosphere where people don't trust the information that they see. I mean, in the war in Gaza with Israel, for instance, the sheer flood of information is too much even for the most seasoned experts to parse through and understand. And they do this for a living, 24/7. For most of us who are not experts, and you see it on your feed, and you get instantly confused. And the worst case scenario, you pick the first thing that confirms what you already want to believe, and you just go with it. But also there's this scenario where you're just apathetic and you don't want to try anymore, you don't want to be informed, you don't want to know, and you tune out. And these are both dangerous, as I mentioned in the beginning, that staying home instead of being engaged in the vote, for instance, that's what
not an
lost
option
the election.
in Brazil, for instance, but in many countries, in most countries, it
or
is
you
an
compelled
option
to vote in Brazil.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. Maybe this is unique to the States, but I think the range of damage that AI can do is pretty impressive.
Marco, in my intro to our conversation, I mentioned what Justice Alexandre de Moraes said in the seminar Inteligência Artificial, Desinformação e Democracia, organized by the school, FGV Conhecimento, or FGV Conhecimento, Empresa Brasil de Comunicação, no need to say that in English, but anyway, in partnership with Democracy Reporting International, DRE. And he said in the panel, I happen to be moderating, that sanctions have to be hard in case candidates use artificial intelligence to make deepfake and spread disinformation. How key is this message and its timing just before the beginning of the electoral cycle?
I think it's very audacious. I mean, he was quite tough on this proposal and his eagerness to do that. And I have no doubts about it. He really wants to go in this direction. The problem is that he needs a lot of platforms. And I'm quite worried about for example, the design of the algorithms, because the algorithms are not designed for preserve democracy. It is designed to spread information and to understand patterns of consuming and especially the emotional aspects of these patterns. So in the end, how much the platforms will be interested in calibrate during the elections the algorithms to benefit democracy and trying to avoid the spread of fake news and hate speech during the process, because actually in the end is a kind of, it's a business, so it's market oriented, and in the end you have to profit whatever kind of information you have. So it's in the end it's a kind of political decision that platforms have to agree with. So when he says that he will go after those who spread fake news, but mostly use AI for a kind of distortion of the democratic process in Brazil, which is, I think it's fine. It's a very good initiative, I would say. But in the end, the platform must be accountable for that as well. So the platforms are part of a huge part of the solution, but also they are a huge part of the problem. And so I have doubts of how effective in the end this can be, unless he brings the platforms to arena. He says, you guys are going to be also accountable and responsible, and I can go after you in the end. I mean, that's a part of the problem, and he didn't address that. He addressed just candidates that are trying to manipulate the process, but the platforms are also part of this.
Yes, it's been discussed in Brasilia. Well, there is this discussion about the Fake News Act, Fake News Bill, which is being discussed in our House of Representatives, and also our Supreme Court is going to discuss part of our Marco Civil da Internet Act in Brazil, which talks about the responsibility of the big techs, of the platforms. I mean, are they responsible for a third party post? I mean, if I post something that is accusing someone of a crime or something, is the platform also responsible for carrying this lie, this message? So it's a philosophical, ethical, moral discussion, I think. Don't you think so, Heather?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm only slightly familiar with the fake news bill here in Brazil, but I understand it's modeled heavily on the DSA in Europe. And at least in that case, the choice that the regulators made there was to really not to regulate on content moderation and what is legal, and leave this still to the member states to decide. And instead it imposed a duty of care on the platforms to show that they have due process for taking down disinformation if it's reported, that there is a process for users to make claims or make cases if they need to see something taken down, and that it's clear the steps for them. And it also imposes transparency on the platform so that they have to proactively report on these efforts and sort of lift the black box a little bit so that we understand what's going on their platforms, and in this way sort of circumventing this more philosophical argument about what should be allowed, because I think we also have some apprehension over the platforms themselves deciding what speech stays on, who gets deplatformed, when they should get deplatformed, when they should be allowed back on. I mean, these are issues that are important to our entire democracies, and in the end, we can't be beholden to the whims of one billionaire, for how they control our conversation. So I think it's a really tricky space. If I understood correctly, the idea was that politicians who are spreading disinformation as well would be revoked from Congress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or wouldn't be allowed to run.
Okay. Yeah. I do think that's an interesting solution. I mean, as you probably know, George Santos in the U.S. was recently removed from Congress, and there was some concern over this move because it's a big deal to remove someone who the voters put in office and sort of go against the will of the voters and say, we've had enough of your lies and your disinformation, and is this the right move to do? But it became a matter of misusing his position. But I think, to me, this is a more interesting and more powerful solution, and of course we'd have to understand the ramifications, but it is interesting because we are saying we're not relying on the platforms themselves to regulate this field and interfere in our politics, but we're really taking power from them in their seat, in our body that we still control. It's not a private company, it belongs to all of us, and to take away their source of power in a way. I mean, of course, they can still join a different social media platform and still reach their constituents, and I think that's interesting to compel them to not be able to run again. But yeah, I cannot say with certainty, but to me it's a very interesting idea.
And Marco, how do you see the use of artificial intelligence in the elections, in the campaign in Argentina?
I think it was huge, and I think it's a kind of proxy that what you're going to see in the next elections. Mm-hmm. So I'm quite worried about next year. As you said, it's a huge part of the population in democratic countries who are going to vote next year. And what we saw in Argentina, and I would say we're not talking about something extremely expensive or extremely complicated to do.
Any teenager can do it.
yes, very effective in the end. But the point is that it's quite worried for me what's going to happen next year. And I think in terms of Brazil specifically, I think we have to have a close eye on what's going to happen next year, because we have to be prepared for the general elections we're going to have in 3 years. And I think that's very complicated. I would like to add one thing. Just in the beginning with our conversation, I said, well, we're going through a very extreme and complicated situation because we have this geopolitical stretch in the world, but also we have the problem of disinformation and so forth. In the end, we have political and political leaders, autocrats running certain countries. They're attacking other countries and promoting insurgency in a violent way in other places, as we saw in Hamas, for example. And these autocrats has a lot of power, and in another layer we also have autocrats that controls information, 6 or 7, that owns the major platforms, that they have their own rules in the same sense. Yeah. So we have this situation that they are both acting not together in the sense that they have a common plan for creators, but in the end,
they're very powerful.
It's a confluence of these two levels of autocracies.
Yeah.
And how we can deal with that, it's simultaneously. I think this is a very complex moment that we have.
Yanis Varoufakis, former Minister of Finance in Greece, he says capitalism is dead. According to him, what we have today is what he calls techno-feudalism, which is exactly that. What do you make of it, Heather?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I mean, throughout history, really, the flow of information and who yields it has always been closely linked to power. And now we see that in a really extreme form, and it is very much tied to that capitalism. I think this is an interesting term. It's my first time hearing it. Technological feudalism.
Yeah, techno-feudalism. Exactly.
So we are all serfs or peasants on their internet.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I would be more interested to hear about this, but it rings true to me because we are beholden to it in some ways. I mean, there is some debate about how crucial this is because unlike, other forms of communication, for instance, which we more or less take for granted or much more guaranteed to us. Social media, you might say, is completely necessary or maybe unnecessary, that you can do without it. But I would say, as someone who works in this field on social media, for me, the step I've taken personally is to take a step back from social media, because I really feel, the unhealthy pool, not only of disinformation, but, the effect of information on my mental health and the 24-hour news cycle. And I do pay the cost for that as well, to be less informed and less up to date as quickly, and having to find my way to the information differently.
Don't you have FOMO, fear of missing out?
A lot of FOMO, yeah. To be honest, sometimes sending photos to friends and I already saw that. So I do feel that this monopoly on information, you have to participate in it to be part of society and to be part of political bodies. So I think that rings true to a large extent, that we're beholden to them.
So now we come to that part of our show when I ask a question to artificial intelligence. É o nosso momento IA. So my question was, during electoral campaigns, how can citizens differentiate authentic audio and video from those generated by artificial intelligence? Answer. Here are some steps to follow. First, verify the source of the content. Look for reliable information. Check if it was released by official or recognized sources. Second, analyze the context. See if the content aligns with the candidate's previous statements and actions. Pay attention to details like audio and video quality, editing, and coherence. Finally, seek confirmation from other reliable sources. Check if other media outlets are also sharing the same content. Remember to be vigilant and critical of the information we receive, especially during elections. Heather, who's more likely to spread fake news in general? Right-wing, left-wing parties, center parties. I think the extremes, perhaps. Maybe we see it more often coming from the far right, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, up till now, I think it's been a move of the far right. And I can just speak more specifically for the U.S. context, but in my opinion, this is a tactic to sway people on what what the right is really mobilizing on, which are these social issues, sort of not really about economic policy, not really about what I'm going to do for you to improve your life, maybe in a shaky way, but really about these cultural wars. And that way, using these tactics to really pushing those narratives, and especially to, create visuals or create proof that can substantiate it, and to turn the story, I think, is right now a hallmark of the right. But realistically, either side could be using it in the future. I hesitate to point the finger at just one party, but I think at the moment that's what we see.
What about Brazil? I think it's a hallmark of the right too, right?
Yes, I think it's the right as well. Although the left, during the elections, we can see the use of also fake news, and the use of the bots, a lot of bots to distort, spread information, especially disinformation. But by far, the extreme right is the most efficient sector in the political arena that better use fake news and distortions of the emotional speech to achieve their goals, and I think that in a certain sense, it is quite logical, because the extremes has a very powerful group of arguments that can bring to the day by day of the disputes of narratives, and can mobilize more the emotions. For example, I think that there are some issues. She mentioned the cultural war. I think it's important, but the cultural war means essentially, the fear that people has in a new economy, that they don't have a place to work, the habits that are changing, the immigration thing, the uncertainties about health, for example, as we saw during the pandemic. So manipulating these issues and the information, especially the disinformation about it, can compose a kind of a structure of narratives that brings fear, doubt, uncertainty. And if you offer, on the other hand, some kind of easy solutions or a movement that brings you to some point that you feel part of a group, more secure, you can go in this direction easily. So that's the reason I think in the end, the center spectrum of the political environment are much less effective in their message than the extreme right and extreme left. But extreme right is by far very, very effective.
Have the father figures. Right. Like now we have Geert Wilders winning the elections in the Netherlands. Also in Europe, of course, Viktor Orbán is there since 2010. And what else? The far-right party was second in the Swedish elections and part of the government. Same thing in Finland. Not to mention Giorgia Meloni and the growth of Marine Le Pen in France. And Alternative für Deutschland, since you were in Berlin.
Yeah.
Do you perceive a sort of tendency, and how do you see it?
Well, the way I see it is that we're living in a difficult time. You know, we have, after the pandemic, but even before, some economic difficulties for a lot of the world. And as Marco pointed out, it's this sense of belonging in the economic future that I think in most cases is really triggering these responses. And we also see a lot of, I should say, a lack of movement or real action on behalf of governments, that people are losing faith in these institutions to really meaningfully improve their lives. And I think what strongman leaders or authoritarian leaders offer to people, as you put in this father figure role, is this sense of security that someone is going to get the job done no matter what, be damned the rules. And this is obviously a dangerous idea, but I think it's really appealing to people on an emotional level, that there will be someone who gets in there, changes things up, and it will be different than what we have. And it's always more appealing to overthrow a system than to tweak it or to find change over time. Especially as voters, when we are the voter, we look for a quick fix. What can you do for me next year? And the reality is that policy and politics and the real work of improving people's lives, these are long-term processes. And it can be really easy to lose your faith in that when you know that it's not working. And I say loss of faith, but really it's a reality that people are seeing that things are not working for them.
So we have more dissatisfaction, we have more inequality, and that brings us back to artificial intelligence, because it's going to steal jobs, right? So, more people with no work at all will be more dissatisfied, and so does polarization tend to be on the rise? Do you think so?
I think so. I think if you think about the impact on job creation and employment, it's going to be huge. You have a place for very high-skilled people. You're still going to have a place for very low-skilled people, and everything between. You're going to suffer a lot, especially middle class, which have been so important for sustained democracy. And that middle class can be more easily attracted to the different size and polarization, and by that you can harm democracy a lot. In the end, we have to think how we are protecting democracy, and those who are against our democratic systems, and there are many countries against it. What they are doing in this direction, they are really working on this direction. It's just, unthinkable. The attack that, for example, Israel suffered from Hamas was something really calibrated to destroy not Israel, of course, but its image, because it was targeted to provoke a reaction that in the middle run will be really damage to the Israeli image in the world. So, for example, if you look for the kibbutz that were attacked, mostly from socialist profiles, and very eager to have a kind of a peace agreement with the Palestinians, and the extent and the anger of it is targeted to create such a hate that makes impossible a different political solution for decades. So this was planned. If you take a look on what's going on in Ukraine, we have the same thing happening in Europe. So it's amazing what's going on. But if you go to our democracies, the level of distrust and hate to others, both in the U.S., we can remember the attack to the Congress. Mm-hmm. In Brazil, we can remember the attack in Congress. I have no memories of that during democratic times. So I think we really must be worried, because behind that there's a huge process of using communication and information and disinformation to promote, to incentive, and to use the results of violent movements to give impression that oppressors came from democracy, from institutions. So it's an attack against institutions in the end. So if the national building, in state building, in democracy are based on institutions, and if you attack institutions, destroy institutions, especially attack the confidence that you have in the system, in some sort of confidence that you can have, of course, with criticism, but you still you have besides the three powers, you have the press, you have liberty of speech, and so on. In the end, what will be the future of democracy for us?
Wow, tough question. So just one last question, Heather. Let's talk about Democracy Reporting International. What exactly do you do?
Could I actually go back to an earlier question?
Sure.
Before I started coughing, because that's a good segue. The response from ChatGPT about how to know when you're looking at a synthetic medium. One of the things that we do at DRI is that we focus on emerging threats to disinformation, the disinformation ecosystem, and that's predominantly on AI at the moment. And we produced a guide this year, which is a guide to detection of advanced disinformation, so that you can see through different medium like deepfakes, video, audio, and text, how you can detect for yourself as an individual person what things you can look out for. So things from visual cues, we know some of the lighting on photos are not realistic. There maybe are too many hands going around, so we give tips to users who want to see that. But there's also some really interesting research in there about the use of AI to detect disinformation, and some of that research that's emerging is very interdisciplinary and very fascinating. For instance, being able to use AI to see that in this fake video there are no typical biological markers like your heartbeat or the way it changes the color in your face when your voice pumps, or the limits of your voice. When I speak, I have to take a breath, and there's certain limitations because of my biology, and these fake voices don't have those telltale signs. So we do a lot of work on this to inform the public and relevant stakeholders about how to look at AI and how to know what they're seeing, and also what is the danger of it. But we also do a lot of work on social media monitoring, and this is sort of our bread and butter overall. We've monitored over 20 or 25 elections globally and all over the world. We're doing work right now with FGV on the Brazilian political discourse, and we'll be looking at the municipal elections next year. And we really use those two pillars to do a lot of work in digital policy, wherein we work with stakeholders in Brussels on things like the DSA and the European Code of Practice on Disinformation, to meet with platforms and to meet with the Commission to bring evidence, to make recommendations, and to bind together as civil society, because ultimately these regulations are only as powerful as we make them. We need to enforce them. We need to be watchdogs and push for them to really reach their potential. And we hope that we can be part of that fight and leading the riot, I guess.
The DSA being Digital Services Act, very important bill approved by the European Parliament. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending time with me, talking to us. It was a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Marco.
Thank you so much for you.
Thank you for having me, and also thank you for speaking in English so that I could join. I know it's not easy.
Next time it's going to be German.
Okay, I will make a note to study more.
You've been there for like 5 years now.
Yes, I'm horrible. It's I know.
No problem. It's difficult anyway. Or Portuguese, or whatever.
I will choose one and we will do it.
Ok. Obrigada a vocês também pela audiência. Até o próximo Meio Tempo.